Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. The Missouri Legislature wound up a grinding session on Friday, handcuffed to a large degree by the budget crisis facing the state. Finances, or lack thereof, dictated a lot of what legislation would look like. When the final bell sounded, a significant amount of business had been finalized, although the number of bills passed was the lowest in years. How productive was the session? With me to talk about it and what was and was not accomplished, Joe Maness, political reporter for the St. Louis Beacon. Terry Jones is professor of political science and public policy at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and the man who has been tracking legislative news all session for St. Louis Public Radio, Marshall Griffin. He joins us from Jefferson City. Thank you all so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, we've had an entire weekend to digest all that happened during the legislative session. Let me ask each of you, beginning with Marshall, to give us kind of your overview. Marshall, what kind of a grade would you give the legislative session?
Well, taking into consideration that there was very little money to work with, probably a C+.
All right.
Just based on the fact that they could. Maybe a C-. I'll downgrade them a little bit because of the lack of an economic development bill. It was really amazing on the last day, the push that happened, or push that did not happen, I should say, to get something done on this, and it's going to result in, of course, more budget cuts. We just don't know when it'll happen. It could happen this week, could happen in the next few weeks, or when the budget is signed. So. They got a lot of other things accomplished. They did get an ethics bill. They did get autism insurance. But the big one, economic development, fell short just at the finish line. Joe, your thoughts?
Well, I'll be like the governor. I don't go for grading because then you're kind of putting in your own thoughts about what you would like to see. I think if you grade it from the aspect of what the legislature wanted, I would say, obviously, the Republicans think they did, who are in control of the legislature, thought they probably got an A or A minus. Republicans in the Senate probably might give them a B. And then, of course, the Democrats give them low grades across the board. But the governor, who's trying to walk this tightrope of getting along with the Republicans who are in control, refused to give a grade on Friday either. I think they, from their standpoint, aside from getting the budget out earlier than had been in decades, they got quite a few of the social issues which are important to certain Republicans, especially going into an election year. So they're going to have something on the ballot about health care. They've come out against mandates, and they got something passed. It's just a resolution, but the point is they can point to that. They can point to some sort of ethics bill, although, as the governor pointed out, it was watered down. And one of the more crucial aspects of it, barring legislators from being lobbyists for each other, paid lobbyists for each other, is not in the final bill, which is rather surprising since that's what Rod Jetton, the former House Speaker, actually got in trouble for. So,
Terry, you don't have to grade it, but give me your impressions, your overview, if you would.
The legislature gave up some of its power and authority and control, at least in the short run. It had the opportunity to be a full participant in how Missouri is going to reduce its budget. In effect, it kicked the can not simply down the road, but over to the governor's office because it passed a budget that everybody agrees is unbalanced and is going to require hundreds of millions of dollars of additional cuts. Moreover, there is agreement that the problem is going to be even worse with the next year's budget. That is the one that will go into effect July 1, 2011. That's going to be at least $1 billion problem, and they did not take any action that would alleviate or reduce that problem, even though they know it's going to happen. We all know it's going to happen.
Would you think that they kicked the can down the road for political purposes to put the governor in a spot that would be politically damaging to him, perhaps?
No, I think it's more of a problem, and I would like Joe's opinion on this in terms of differences of approach by the Republican House leadership and the Republican Senate leadership more than a Republican Democrat or Republican legislature going against a Democratic governor.
Joe, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's true. And some of it has to do with the aims. The House, at least right now, my perception is they're much more political. And part of it's because with term limits, nobody's in a chamber very long. So if you're in the House, often those guys in the House, or ladies, are soon going to be jockeying for a Senate seat. So they are a bit more leery about taking positions that could hurt them at the polls. The people who are in the Senate, unless they're one of the few who's going to run for statewide, they're going to be leaving and maybe running for something else back home or maybe for nothing. I mean, like Charlie Shields, the outgoing Senate leader, who is just going to go back to being his job. So they can afford to be a bit more, quote, statesmanlike and take positions that may not be as popular in the short term with voters because they don't have to worry about that. And Shields, I'd interviewed him almost 3 weeks ago, and he was hoping that because of term limits that actually, at least in his chamber, that actually would happen, that some people would actually take statesman-like positions regarding like revamping government, doing some of the things that, frankly, to meet their budget restrictions, they're probably going to have to do. Because one of the problems is they passed this budget, they made the cuts in general that the governor wanted, $500 million. But this budget was contingent on a whole bunch of other actions being taken to combine some state agencies and doing different other things, and the House didn't go along with any of that. So the budget is based on some assumptions that didn't happen. So that's why the governor's going to have to make these other cuts.
Marshall, on this issue of term limits, do you see it as Joe does, that it had some impact on what was and was not done this time?
Absolutely. A lot of people were realizing that this was their last hurrah, and they have to pass. Pardon me. They had to pass particular pieces of legislation with in mind that they're leaving something and want their legacy to at least be able to have a legacy. Now, in addition to that, those who are running for other offices, they may be term limited out, but are running for other offices, want something that they can run on and point to, whether it's their track record or whether it is something that they're preparing. Their preparations for next year, knowing that this $1 billion shortfall is coming, and even if they're not going to be around to deal with it next year, they want to be able to say that they did something to prepare the state for that eventuality and to help the state as much as they could.
Terry, what does this tell us about term limits?
Well, the research is coming in every month in terms of term limits, not simply in Missouri but in other states, and it's been a real down for state government and the ability of state legislatures to play meaningful roles. But the voters still like it, and it's not going to go away. And we're on an 8-year cycle in Missouri. The term limits were passed in 1992, went into effect in 94. There are 8-year limits in each body, which meant there was a significant turnover in 2002, and add 8 to 2002, you get 2010. Right. So we'll have another significant turnover this time. It does undercut the role of the representative government, the legislature, within state government, and empowers lobbyists and the governor and the bureaucrats.
Sure. We always lose a lot of good legislators, and we always bring in a lot of brand new ones who have to learn the ropes.
And the lobbyists stay forever, or some of the former legislators become those lobbyists, many of them. And the bureaucrats stay around for a while, and those are important actors in state government. I'm not talking negatively about them, but it increases their power and it decreases the power of the people acting through the legislature.